Everybody, welcome back to the shop. You know, like saws, I'm a real sucker for chisels. And I think it's because, just like saws, chisels can be so easily customized to the job at hand and your own personal comfort. You know, you can change handles out and make them bigger or smaller and fit your hand and balance them just right for your own use. It can be a little challenging sometimes to put together a whole set of chisels on the used tool market. Sometimes, you know, they're just really abused. But if you're persistent, it can be done. Over the last several months, I've actually put together a set of 19th century to early 20th century firmer style chisels, you know, straight-sided firmers. The nice thing about being able to rehandle your own chisels is that you can pick them up fairly inexpensively. I picked up this set of 12 chisels for no more than $10 a piece, including the shipping. The thing is, sometimes you get some really nice ones like this with a really nice handle, but most of the times you end up with chisels with really mangled handles or something like this, where there's no handle at all. The great thing about chisels like this, though, is that the steel is in really great shape. The only thing is there's no handle, but you can pick these up for a couple of dollars a piece. Chisels that I find without handles like this, you can usually pick up for less than $5 for the chisel, and then you pay a couple dollars to have it shipped. So the challenge with these is putting on a replacement handle. So that's what I want to show you how to do today, is to rehandle one of these old tang chisels. You might think, it's a piece of cake to go ahead and just turn a new handle for one of these old chisels. You may be right, but more oftentimes than not, it's not so straightforward. The problem lies in this forged tang here. Now, normally what you would think of you would have one straight line that runs through the chisel from the tip straight through the tang. That would make it easy to just drill a hole nice and centered on a block of wood, jam it in, and you'd be good to go. The problem is, many times this tang is not necessarily centered with the rest of the body of the chisel, and that's just from the forging process. It's just the way it was with these rough forged chisels. So the trick is that we want to drill our hole as straight as possible, but then we want to base the angles and the handle of the chisel off the center line of the tool. So we're going to use a significantly oversized block in order to make a handle for this chisel. We're going to start with a hole in the center. This block is about 2 inches square, for this small chisel. But we're going to remove a lot of that wood so that we can ensure that the center line of the handle is lined up with the center line of the chisel. Now, one thing to keep in mind with these older chisels, sometimes you can get ones with nice big bolsters on them, which lends a lot of support to the front of the handle. Similar to this big 2-inch chisel here, there's a lot of meat at the front of this handle because you have a really nice sized bolster here. Sometimes the bolsters are real small, especially on chisels that were manufactured a little bit later. You have a real small bolster like this, what that typically means is the front of that handle is going to taper down much smaller. And you need to be careful because it's very easy to split out that handle, just like I've done here, if the bolster is too small when you're driving that handle up for a final fit. So I'm going to show you a couple different ways how we address that problem. So I start by taking a block, in this case a 2x2 block of beech, plane it 2 faces flat and square to each other, and cut it to final length. And I mark the center of one end where I'm going to drill the hole for the tang and put it in the vise for drilling. I use 2 bits to start the tang hole. The first I make about the size of the lower portion of the tang, and this one I'm going to drill to full depth. The second bit is a little bigger, and it's about, if you come 1/3 of the way down from the bolster, that's about the thickness that I make that second drill bit. And we're going to drill that one down to just shy of the halfway point. As I bore the hole for the tang, I'm trying to remain as plumb as possible, but I'm not overly concerned about it. If I don't get it perfect, I can always fix it in the next step and when I lay out for the taper of the handle. And with the first bit, I'll bore all the way, full length of the tang, maybe a little more to provide a little extra clearance. And then I'll switch over to the bigger bit, and I'll only bore down about 1/3 of the way with this bit. And once you have the stepped hole bored, the chisel's not going to fit all the way in. And that's okay, we don't want it to yet. We need to ream this out and get it to fit the tang. Now the thing with these old chisels, and any tang chisel is really, they have a tapered tang on them, but every one is different. So, every chisel, every maker has their own taper, and because these things were mostly hand forged, they all have different individual tapers, and sometimes they're not even straight in line with the shaft of the tool. You can actually see that this one here runs off to the side a little bit. Now we can straighten that out a little bit, and I will do that. I'll straighten it out just a touch, but we need a way that we can taper this hole and get it to fit this tang. Well, steel is harder than wood, so a trick that we can use is to actually use the tang of the chisel as a reamer and just put it in and start reaming that hole. And with the stepped hole bored in there, it should just take a couple of minutes to really start boring this hole to the taper of the tang for a custom fit, and you won't have to worry about what the angle of the taper is and getting it perfect. Now the other thing is, with this trick, you can see that when you insert the chisel, you may not have the hole bored perfectly straight, like I said before. Now that one leans a little bit to the right. I didn't bore too well. And it leans a little bit forward as well. So anyway I tilt this, it's got a little lean in it. Well, we can correct that to a point with the reaming job. So I'm going to put more pressure towards this back corner as I ream and try and lean the chisel back in that direction with the reaming operation. Now it's not going to be perfect. We'll improve it somewhat. Once it's reamed, then I'll show you how we're going to go ahead and solve the problem the rest of the way. So once the hole is reamed, I leave the chisel about anywhere from 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch shy of being driven all the way home, because later we're going to drive this for a good friction fit. So we'll drive it the last little bit home rather than ream it out anymore. The other thing I want to keep in mind is once I have this reamed to about the depth that I want to take that chisel and I want to orient it in here, and I want to look at it in different orientations and see which way it looks the straightest. So I'll spin it around and sort of look at it from the side, look at it from the front, spin it, look at it again, and see which way does it look the best. Now these chisel handles that I'm making are thinner in this dimension than they are in this dimension, so they sort of match the chisel. There's about a 1/4 inch difference. It's sort of a rectangular shaped handle. You can sort of see it in the end grain here. That helps you align the chisel and orient the chisel when you pick it up. And it also just looks better with the way that these chisels are. So it's a little bit thinner in this direction. So I tend to look to have it straighter when I'm looking at it, the bevel or the back surface. I'll tend to have it a little bit straighter in that direction if there's a variation, because I can usually afford to lose a little bit more material in this dimension here. So again, I'll let this sit about 1/8 to 3/32 of an inch proud so that I can drive it home. Now the other thing you have to decide is whether you're going to shape the handle with the chisel set or without the chisel set. And there are pros and cons to both ways. The benefits to shaping with the chisel set is to help prevent splitting when you drive the chisel home. This is especially important with the smaller chisels, and especially chisels with smaller bolsters. If you take a look at this bolster, it's really not much bigger than the tang. So when I shape this handle and plane it down to be flush with the outside edges of this bolster, there's not going to be a lot of meat left. So what the risk you run into is that you can end up splitting your chisel handle if you don't leave yourself, if you don't ream it deep enough, and you're forced to drive it home a little bit too far. So with small chisels like this, small bolsters, I like to drive it home first and then shape the handle with the chisel in place. Of course, I want to make sure I blunt this edge first, so just to make it safe. The downside to doing that comes when you get into the larger chisels, especially anything 7/8 to an inch and bigger. If you can imagine for a second that this blank was on this big 2-inch chisel, it could be very difficult to plane this down to its shape because the plane is going to end up hitting the chisel. With the bigger chisels like this, it's actually easier to shape the handle first and then set it. You just need to be a little bit more careful that you, one, don't leave the chisel too proud of the surface, that you don't have to drive it home too far. And two, it helps if your chisel has a big, heavy, substantial bolster like this 2-inch chisel. So I'm going to show you how to do it both ways. For the smaller chisels with the smaller bolsters, I'm going to set it first, and then for the larger chisel that I have here, I'm going to shape it without the chisel set. So the first thing I want to do is set the smaller chisels. So now the process of setting the chisel really couldn't be any easier. You just want to make sure that you have it aligned in the orientation that you want, that's going to give you the straightest set. Make sure that your faces are in line with the flat edges of the chisel. And then I just have a scrap block of wood. Anything will work as long as it's substantial enough. And we go ahead and drive it home until the bolster fits. Right, now that I have the smaller chisels set, the next thing I can do is go on and move on to laying out the shape of the handle. And this is where we're going to correct for any little bit of non-plumb boring that we did when we bored that hole. Now I like to make the chisels, my chisel handles, graduate in size. So the smaller chisels are going to have slightly smaller handles than the larger chisels. So it sort of helps to have some kind of sizes worked out before you go ahead and start. They don't have to be perfect, they don't have to be exact, but just because I like to graduate them, they get, as the chisels get smaller, they get slightly shorter with each chisel, they get slightly narrower and thinner in each direction as well. So I have that all worked out ahead of time, so I can go ahead and lay out the dimensions. But the first thing I want to do, in order to correct for any off-center boring or any crookedness in that chisel handle, is I want to establish a new center line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to establish a center line based on the center line of the chisel itself, and I'm going to transfer that to the handle blank. So as I said, I want to base the new center line of the handle off the center line of the chisel. So I'll go ahead and I'll make 2 marks with a pencil. And I'll usually just do this by eye. You can measure if you want, but I'm going to mark a center line, and you're not going to be able to see this on camera, but I can see the pencil just enough that it's going to help me line up a straight edge. So I'll make a center line here at the center of the tip, and I'll make another center line somewhere down there towards the bottom. And what I can do is line up a straight edge, line my eye over top of that chisel, and line up the straight edge with those 2 marks that I just made. And that will help to create a new center line. And double check it, make sure everything looks good. And that looks pretty good to me. So you can see there how we're going to correct for the fact that I didn't do such a great job boring the hole for this handle. So I'll lay out this center line here, and it's on the flat face that I've already planed. And I'll do the same thing on the other side. So you can see now how it pays to have a fairly oversized blank if you're not so careful with your boring. So now, once I have the new center lines laid out, I can go ahead and lay out the rest of the handle based off of these two center lines. So I will transfer the center lines across the bottom. I've transferred those center lines across the bottom so that I have a permanent record of them, because when I start shaping this, I'm going to remove some of the lines on the sides. So the other thing I want to do is to transfer the edges of the bolster. So I'm just going to put my square here on the, butt it right up to the bolster, and transfer the location of the edges of that bolster. So now I have the bolster located on all four sides. Finally, I can measure off of my center line for where I need to be. So in this dimension, I'm going to measure a 1/2 inch for this particular chisel off of my center line, because this handle for this particular size chisel is going to be 1 inch thick. In this dimension, it's going to be 1 1/4 inches, so I'm going to measure off 5/8 from my center line on each side. Now I want to be sure to transfer those marks to the bottom, because as I said before, we're going to cut them away on the sides, so we're going to lose them later. Okay, and we'll transfer them all the way across. Okay, so I'm going to cut this dimension first. So I want to transfer from the bottom, I'm going to transfer onto this rough sawn side that I haven't yet planed. I'm going to transfer those marks. So that's going to ensure that I have a handle that's square, even though you can clearly see that this is not square, because I'm laying off the center line and doing all my layout off of this square face and this square face. These two faces are square, and the bottom is square with that, or it may or may not be. That's not really important. These two faces are square, so by laying out everything off of here, I can be assured that this will be square when I'm done. So now we're going to also transfer those bolster marks to the sides. Get a straight edge and connect the bolster to the bottom. Again, I'll connect the bolster to the bottom. Now, you can see here how thin that's going to end up being at the top. And that's why I wanted to drive this particular chisel all the way home first. Do the same thing on the other side. Okay, the chisels that aren't set, laid out exactly the same way. Fix the chisel, make sure it's not moving on you, make sure it's tight enough so that it's not going to move around and you're going to lose your setting. But don't set it completely. Lay out your center line. From your center line, you can lay out the width of the butt end. You can transfer the bolster, the sides of the bolster to the top. Connect those lines. Transfer it across the bottom and draw it up the other side. Now, with the chisels that aren't set, we can now remove it, and we can easily take this block over to the bench hook and saw off the waist. With the layout done, I can take the handle blank over to the bench hook and just go ahead and saw off the waist. And I just use my tenon saw here to saw down. I saw as close to the line as possible. I really don't want to do any cleanup with the plane if I can avoid it, because it's hard to plane these angles. But a little bit is inevitable. Once the two sides are sawn off, the first two sides, I then have to go and remark for the other two angled cuts because I just basically cut off the layout. So this is why we needed to transfer the bolster lines and the lines at the butt end of the chisel to the ends, so that now I can transfer those marks back to the sides and then go ahead and take my straight edge and connect the lines to reestablish the taper of the handle. For the handle blanks that already have the chisel head set, it's a little easier to do them in the vise. And I just start it up with my tenon saw and go ahead and finish up with a panel saw. And if you need to clean them up at all, the best way I've found is to just put them on the bench hook and go ahead and plane them. Just be careful that you don't plane the bolster of the chisel and chip your plane iron. For planing the tapered square into a tapered octagon, we need to hold them on edge. In order to do this, I made a simple V-block. It's just a block of wood that I sawed and planed a V-notch into so that I could hold the square on edge to plane the tapered octagon shape. And I just do this by eye. Just make sure you don't go past where the bolster is. You can always clean it up a little bit later, but you don't want that end to be smaller than the bolster. Finally, I scribed lines all around the ends. These are only about 1/4 inch down, and I scribe it on all 8 facets on the face. And then I'll do the same thing and scribe the ends as well. And this is just so that I can knock the corners off the chisel handle to make it a little bit more comfortable. You can do this with a rasp and round it as well. I just take a chisel, pare down to those chamfers to chamfer it off and make it more comfortable, clean it up. And then apply your finish of choice, and you've got yourself a nice new matched set of chisels.